back over here. Okay, so these are fun. The live Q&As are always a good time because it's a fluid conversation. It's not scripted. It's kind of like let's just get into it. I have to look into the cameras. Apparently, I wasn't looking at the cameras. This way. Okay. So this is the fun part about the content game these days is it's getting more organic. You can ask deeper questions. It's a fun experiment. So we are here for the MD5 Jaws launch. So I'm going to start with you, Mr. Neville, before we get into it with Roger. This is a question that I have for you. We're going to start. We have some forum member questions and stuff like that. So it's a big task, and I don't think people really grasp the idea of how intense it can get when you come out with a new club, whether it's a driver, irons, wedges, or whatever. This is a niche item, though. The wedges are, there's grinds and there's bounces and there's all this stuff. So how challenging is it and exciting at the same time to undertake something like this, like a wedge launch?
Well, it's a huge launch, and I think what a lot of people don't realize with the wedges, there's so many different loft bounce combinations, so many different grinds, so many different models. It's actually a bigger undertaking than, say, a driver launch. It really is. There's a ton of different. I think it was like 84 different CAD files, Roger, that had to be done to get all these grinds that you wanted to be in there. We've got the two finishes, so we've been testing the finishes, the look, working on trying to get the right shaft, the right grip. We've got righty and lefty. We've got a whole women's line. We're working on the custom line. So this is 2+ years.
Graphite shaft.
Yeah, the graphite shaft. This is 2+ years in the making to launch a wedge. So people think, oh, it's just one wedge. Well, it's not one wedge. It's 50 different wedges. So really, really big launch for us.
Well, that's always the thing too, is, working for WRX.com, and even in the forums, people, whenever a new club comes out there, people are like, oh God, like now what? It's exciting, but there's always those, I call them haters or trolls or whatever, that have opinions.
We like them too.
Right. But it's, I don't think people really absorb the amount of work and brain power that go into a golf club when it finally hits the market, because it's so easy to just go, oh, this wedge look this way and this one's okay. Like, what's the big deal? It's a big deal. There's some really smart people working at this company, right? So to get it to the point where it's fully cooked, in pictures on the shelves, that's like sleepless nights, hours and hours. And it's not just you two guys. There's a team of, a bunch of people that are involved in this process. So I guess, this is a question for you now. Your pressure is different than his pressure. You're the sort of the creative of the actual thing, right? So how much pressure do you put on yourself when you're coming up with it? They say Callaway goes, go make some new wedges. Where do you start?
That's a great question. I started the tour.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, we're constantly tweaking and trying different things. And I present different options with players that I can really communicate with, and I understand their swings. And we get on some... At some events that have some incredible conditions, and we can really evaluate. And so it's my test center that gives me real feedback. I mean, at our test center, we have a core of really good golfers, and our guys at the test center, led by Randy Peterson, they're really knowledgeable and they understand technique really well, and so we understand bad technique too. So we have to design for both. And that's what we have done.
So you guys have the benefit also of having Phil Mickelson here.
Yes.
On staff. And Sergio, I'll throw him in that bucket. You have two icons,
absolutely.
Right?
Sergio, don't forget him. For sure.
Two completely different profiles too, especially with the wedges, in my opinion. This is just from a layman watching them. But do you have go-to players? Like when you have an idea for a wedge, do you go to Phil and go, I have an idea, what do you think? Or do you kind of make it in your lab and then kind of kick it out to him and then get his feedback after the fact?
Well, Phil has his own line of wedges. I mean,
True.
The PM grind is a unique shape and grind, and every nuance designed into that wedge has function, and that's the way he is. I mean, he's incredible. I was asked earlier today by you who is the best, and I don't think there's anybody close to his skills and his creativity around the greens and his knowledge of what he wants. But it always evolves. I mean, the second generation of the PM, he wanted a few different things. So he's always, working on stuff, and so am I.
Well, he has a true appreciation also for what the general golfer goes through. Like Phil's cool that way. Like, he does these Instagram posts where he'll talk about teaching people how to chip, and like he actually loves that conversation because I've seen him, just in social media, he'll take a guy and go, like, I think it was a football player or something at some tournament, and he got so jacked up explaining bounce and grinds and why. That's why he's such an unlimited resource for you guys, whether he's playing the MD5 Jaws or not.
Right.
Just from a...
Well, the only reason why he actually gravitated to the shape that he did was rough, and he loves to open up that wedge so much in rough that he needed the extra territory at the top of the wedge, and he would have grass stains up there. Still does. So he needs that extra. So he's unique in that way.
Well, this is a show about Jaws, though.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about Jaws. So we're going to get into some forum member questions.
Hit us up.
We had one really, I love the WRX people because they get so nerded out on questions. It's not like, what's the stock shaft? It's like, and you have 8 degrees bounce on the heel and 12, so you get some really funky questions.
Good.
But this is a good one. So this is a KMINTER. I can't even pronounce it. Kimintir, one of our forum members. He says, what is the function of the groove-in-groove technology? Is it to reduce debris interfering with contact or to increase roughness or something else? And I'm going to pose this to you, Roger.
Increase roughness.
Okay.
Of the face. There are rules on face roughness, and everybody up to or before the MD4 was introduced, our last generation, were lasering down into the face between the grooves to create the roughness. And one of our guys in our R&D department said, well, why don't we machine that distance that we can go down up and create positives? And it might wear longer, it might create more roughness. And first of all, I thought that might not be conforming, but it is, as long as you stay within those guidelines. And the other thing is, how do you do it? So our guys, figured it out, and it's quite unique and difficult to do. It takes 10 minutes to machine each of our wedges. They're so exacting, and the new groove that we have in the Jaws wedge as well. But the micros, or the 4 little positives, we machine down, leave those micros up, and it's more spin in wet conditions and rough condition when you're in the rough. Around 800 more RPM to 1,000 more RPM in wet conditions and in the rough.
And it gives you that 84.
It's a little lower launch.
The 84 contact points that you always talk about.
You got 13 edges on the grooves, and you got 4 more in between them, and you add them up, and it's 84 contact points where you can get the ball on an edge.
That's crazy.
So,
see, when you hold up a wedge,
stuff.
you don't see all that stuff in a wedge. Like you pick it up and go, okay, there's those grooves.
What's amazing is that they last longer, than what we did lasering down. It's interesting.
Okay. So this is a question for you, Dave.
Good.
The question's from Kobe S31. He says, it seems that all manufacturers have released their version of the micro groove. This is a sales question.
Ooh.
How does the micro grooves, or how does the grooves on the MD5 Jaws wedge, how does it differ from other grooves out in the market?
Yeah, so I think he's talking about 2 things between the micro grooves, which Roger was just talking about. So that was the groove and groove. But the main groove, which we're calling the Jaws groove in the new MD5 wedges, we're really focusing on the edge radius. So a lot of people think that you get spin based on how large the groove is or how much volume is in the groove. Well, that helps to channel away dirt and debris, that kind of thing. But what's really grabbing the ball is the edge of the groove. So that edge radius is really, really important. So we've manufactured in a really, really tight edge radius there, and it's something that we just, frankly, Roger, have not been able to do in the past, working with some of the top machine shops in the world, where they said we won't cut that groove because we're scrapping 50% of the wedges when we do that. We've had to work on a whole new process so that we were able to cut this groove to that tight of a tolerance.
So how, there's a lot of good product out there, right? And you're in the market, you know what's out there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good wedge makers. If you had a gun to your head and you had to explain why the MD5 Jaws wedge is better than, say, the guy across the street. We're in Carlsbad, so literally it's across the street. What would you say? And it's an honest question to ask a guy at, Callaway. Like, what do you think? Like, what's...
Yeah, well, I would say you start with the OG of wedges, as I say, sitting next to me, 40 years of experience. There's nobody in the industry that has the kind of experience that Roger has designing wedges. And then we have the largest R&D in all of golf. You combine that with the amazing tour staff that we have with Sergio, with Phil, with Henrik Stenson, some of the best players in the world. And that's where you're able to come up with a line like the Jaws. What makes it different? Well, you start obviously with the groove, but there's a lot of things that Roger did on the shaping, on the grinds. We have a new grind, a new W grind here that really make this line unique.
Okay, Roger, this is a question for you. So it just basically says, it's quickly DU says, when you start designing a new wedge, I already asked you where you start. Step one. So did you ever take, the general question is, you take the line of wedges that you have, right? You have 5 grinds. Are you ever satisfied with the grinds? Are you bringing up old grinds that you've used in the past? Is it like, how do you, there's 5 grinds for the 60-degree wedge. How do you eliminate or add to that without overdoing it?
Well, by what people want out on tour. I really judge what we need by their demands out there. And if I'm starting to satisfy and stop grinding, then I have a pretty good line of wedges. But some of the guys will continue to tweak and want to, push a design to where it's not functioning well, so you go too far. So I start to learn the edge of where to stop. And but just like the new low bounce W, it was something that I would grind in our existing W, which was wide or too wide for them, for a shallow attack angle like yourself. And so I had to reduce the heel and tighten the radius front to back and do different things, take some bounce off, and that's how that came about. So we're constantly working and learning from the tour.
He was trying to get me to put the low bounce W in the MD4 lineup. He said, I'm doing this grind so often on tour. Why don't we just launch it as a line extension MD4? I said, let's wait for Jaws MD5. So now we've got it in there, and I think it's the most comprehensive lineup we've ever had. But we really have a grind for everybody, right, Raj?
Absolutely. The other thing you look at is weight distribution, heel toe, as well as the vertical. The Z-axis, and that is critical. And some folks have really tried to raise the CG to increase spin, but other things happen when you do that. You start impacting, you start delofting the club, and you have to add bounce. And then is that bounce really, really good on tight conditions, on short shots when you have too much bounce? So there is a happy medium, and that's where the Jaws MD5 is right at the sweet spot of that.
So we have a question this is one of the live YouTube viewers right now. Rob from New Jersey says, what's the funkiest wedge in the new Jaws lineup? And there is one, and I'll tell you what I think is, but and is there some loft grind combo that MD4 didn't have? There is one I know of. Right. But the funkiest wedge, I'll let you answer that question first, but I have my own opinion.
Well, I'm really proud of this new low bounce W. We have kind of a fitting system. We have a number with the loft, and that indicates the type of swing profile that you have. We have an 8, 10, and 12. And the 12 is for somebody who is steep, has a lot of set in their swing, and the 8 and 10 are for a shallow attack angle. And the 10 means that you don't open it up, and anything with an 8 means it's really good to open up, and that's where that low bounce W has an 8 on it. So it's a W or 8.
See, I think the X grind is, and I have a question for you here in a second, but the X grind to me is the funkiest one because it appears like a low bounce player's wedge, but it's actually the beefiest of the bunch from a bounce perspective, and it doesn't play like it looks. Like you get it, you look at it, like, okay, this might be closer to a C grind, but it's not. It's nothing close to a C grind, which I thought was really interesting because if you look at it, it's like this is, it's got heel and toe relief, it's got all the sexiness to it, but it's a player for my old man, like that's the wedge I'd probably throw him in.
Yeah.
That would have been the one I would pick too, because it has that high measured bounce, but you can still open it up, and it's good for a lot of different techniques. And we have a lot of better players playing the X grind also,
right.
Roger.
Yeah, that's right.
How do you, okay, so you have a job.
It's technique driven though.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So Dave, you have a job, you have to sell bouncing grinds to the masses, right? So he can sell it, right? When he gets hands-on players, but you're for the general golf public, like one of your jobs, your biggest job is to tell the story about how to explain bounce and all this stuff to the general masses. So how do you do that in your job? Like what's the biggest challenge and how do you do it?
It's something that's really misunderstood. A lot of people don't understand bounce. They don't understand, effective bounce versus measured bounce. So one of the things we've focused on, we have this 8, 10, and 12 system, is simplifying the line so that we have the 8, 10, and 12. We don't have a ton of other numbers in there, and we're also marrying that up with the grind. So if you get yourself into the right grind, we were just talking about the X grind, the bounce will come along. The bounce will be correct for that grind. So say you struggle out of the bunkers, you play a lot of soft conditions and you need a wide sole. So you've got the high bounce W. You get into that W, it's going to have the correct amount of bounce. So that's one thing we've worked on. We have a fitting protocol that we train all of our sales reps on and all of our fitters on. We also have a wedge selector tool online that people put in what kind of conditions they play, what's their technique, what type of shots they like to hit. It does all the algorithms for it. We have different scoring methodology, and it recommends a grind for you. But of course, the best way is to go and get fit and get fit outside around the green when you can hit all those shots.
So we were posting some Instagram stories when we got started because we've been filming all day. So this is the tail end of a video, kind of a video thing.
Content
that we're doing
carnival.
Together. Yeah, it's a little bit of a circus. But one of the IG stories I posted today was about your big advocate that a wedge fitting, where you can tell if a player can use a wedge from 50 yards in. That's the real meat of figuring out when you're figuring out for a wedge. Explain that to the people that weren't following it on Instagram today. That's a really interesting way to look at it.
Well, that's a shot anywhere from 50 or 40 yards in is where you really have to determine if the sole is right, because you have to, that shot to hit it properly is putting the sole on the ground and letting it slide through the ball. You in that way you can create the speed and so forth. And the ideal technique is a shallow technique. So to anything beyond that, you're actually hitting the ball first. Okay, you're not using the technique where you're maximizing your trajectory and spin. You're hitting the ball first. So you're going to have forward shaft lean when you're hitting the ball first. When you're hitting anything below that 40 or 50 yards, you're not, depending upon what type of shot you want to hit. Low, yes, you'll have some forward shaft lean, but you're still putting the sole before the ball and letting it slide through.
How do you...
And that technique is critical to determine the right sole for you.
Well, it's interesting too, because you mentioned Seve's you thought Seve was one of the best wedge players of all time, and a lot of the European Tour players like Sergio and those guys, they play with their wedges a little bit different than the Americans do. And they, you had said this today about getting the ball in the green faster and getting it to roll out, and that's a Seve thing. Like getting it. The reason why he holed out so many bunker shots is because he got it on the green and rolled it like a putt, right?
That's correct.
That's a message that I think gets missed. That's like an art form that I don't think the younger generation, you guys just sign Akshay Bhatia, right? You have these young kids that pound it.
Yep.
And they play everything's in the air. Everything's in the air. So, what do you think, it's kind of a weird question, but like, is that an important thing for everybody, even the tour guys, to understand the importance of getting the ball on the ground? Or do you like the pros are doing their thing and everybody else needs to play here?
Well, I think you can get more reliability of the reaction on the ball with a little bit less loft, like those players like Seve with a 56 degree. If you don't necessarily use the 60, okay, the 60 has so much loft that when you hit it, you have so much of an oblique angle that you can't hit it consistently like you can a lesser loft. So you get better reaction from the ball. And when, for an example, when the USGA changed the groove rule, okay, everybody, the spin. Well, what happened is that the scoring actually went down, okay, got better because they went to a lesser spinning groove, and especially in your lower lofts or your mid lofts, and you got more consistent spin and run out, and that's why I like to hit further behind the ball in a bunker, for example, and letting it run out. That's the way you make them, and it's a little safer.
More margin for error.
More margin for error.
Exactly. You don't see this thing flying over the green so often.
So, Dave, this is a question that we had in the forums as well in regards to the launches that you guys go through. Obviously there's a bunch of different launches for Callaway. You have the irons, Apex and all that kind of stuff. But when you come out with a wedge line, how much does the iron line influence the wedge line? Like, is it all married together, or are they literally everything's in a vacuum? Like, how does that work?
Well, it's not in a vacuum because the whole R&D team works together, and what we see from a lot of tour players is they want to blend their pitching wedge or their gap wedge in the set into the wedges, into the Jaws MD5. So one of the things, and Roger can talk about this, is really he improved the shaping on the 46 degree, the 48, the 50 and 52 to make it a little bit more compact to match up better with the iron sets, because we had some tour players say they were playing an Apex Pro or an X Forge or an MB, and then they wanted to play the wedge because of the spin and the control, but then the shaping of it was a little bit too big for them. So now I've blended the set, I think, really well between the irons and the wedges, and that comes from working together, Roger and the various teams in R&D.
This is a YouTube question, and this is a sales question. Gary Cesaro, through our YouTube feed, said, will these be at retailers on the 20th? When will the general public get their hands on the MD5?
They will. They will. They're going to be in stores this Friday. They're actually available for pre-sale right now. So if you want to be one of the first to get one, you can go out either on CallawayGolf.com or to one of our partner sites, and you can pre-order them. You'll be one of the first to get them. But at 9/20, officially in stores. We also have the whole customs that's going to be available. So if you want to get your initials, stamping, you don't like the blue, you want to change it out, you want to put your college team, little USC on there with the red and the gold.
Yeah.
You can do that. I can't believe Roger even approved the blue for Jaws being a
how do
USC
you not just
guy.
Trojan the hell out of these things?
Well, MD4 was red, so.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about.
I can't do it every time.
This question just came up in the forums also. Finishes. So you have the Tour Chrome, you have the black Tour Brushed or whatever.
Tour Gray and
Tour
Platinum
Gray.
Chrome. Yeah.
So, the next question. When are the raw ones coming out? That's all the gearheads want to know when the raw wedges are coming. Are they coming?
I will deflect the dims.
That's a Dave question.
TBD. But with the MD4, we brought that raw line out later. I mean, one thing we obviously working with all of the tour players. A lot of them use raw. We want to make sure that they're taken care of first. But I know there's a lot of interest in the raw. What we did with MD4 is we had them available through custom only, so that they wouldn't be going into stores and rusting on the shelf, because people tend to not like that, to actually buy the wedge when it's already rusted. So we were able to protect them here through custom orders. So I'm sure we will be working on that for the Jaws line as well at a point in the future.
We will bring them out.
Yeah.
Okay. And the biggest reason why OEMs don't bring out raw wedges all the time on a mass scale is because shelf life, right? It's kind of like a marketing thing. It's like they don't look so hot when they're sitting there for a month and a half, right?
We've tried it in the past, even using slate finish on the Mac Daddy 2, and because that wasn't plated, people start getting their fingerprints on it, and they would start to rust on the shelf. And then our retailers, not the consumers necessarily, the retailers would complain, "Hey, you got a bunch of rusty wedges on the shelf."
They have no idea that they have absolute gold in their hands.
Yeah.
Anthony Jones asked the question. It's a really good question. Heard that your wedge lie angle should be flatter than your irons. Is that true? That's a Roger question.
Mm-hmm.
Well, our standard lie is 64 degrees, and yes, the answer is yes. You tend to get a little flatter for different shots that you want, but that's why we start at 64.
Where do you land on wedge shafts? Because you guys obviously put like a lighter dynamic gold. I think it's an S200 dynamic gold.
The Tour Issue 115.
Okay.
Yeah. So the obvious thing that's happening in the marketplace is iron shafts are definitely getting lighter. So a lot of people using graphite, a lot of people using lightweight steel offerings. So when we had the True Temper dynamic gold that weighed between 125 and 130, that was a huge jump for a lot of players. So our best-selling iron had an XP95 in it. Then you had a 30-gram jump to the wedges, and some people frankly couldn't swing them. I know you do a lot of clinics with women golfers who were playing, with 130-gram shafts in their wedges, and they had a really hard time just swinging them.
Swinging an axe.
Yeah. So we have a graphite offering this time around, which is a stock offering at no upcharge, which is the Catalyst from Project X, and then we went with the lighter 115 in the steel.
That's the standard for the men's, and we have a special line
for the women
ladies,
as well,
which is a lighter shaft and a special grip length, and we incorporate the W, which is like a mini sure out. So it's really good for the ladies.
We only have you for a few more minutes. I know you got to get out of here. Then I'm going to go really dark with Roger here to finish this out.
Deep and dark.
Yeah. Let's talk about Callaway Golf as a whole. The company's probably as healthy as it's ever been. The last 4 or 5 years for this company's been pretty awesome. With Epic coming out a few years ago, that was a huge launch, and the irons are doing well. So looking forward now, this is the first kind of teaser for the new line coming out in 2020. What are you most excited about for the next year? And you can't say, well, the Jaws wedge, like just in a company in general, culture, everything. Like, what do you get fired up on in the morning?
Well, I think Callaway's in a great spot, and our CEO Chip always talks about humble and hungry, So we do have a leadership position in a lot of these categories, but I never feel like our work is done, Roger. Like if we're number 2 in a category, how do we get ourselves to number 1? We've done some acquisitions that have been really successful, like Travis Matthew, OGO, and then recently with Jack Wolfskin in Europe. So I think we'll continue to look at those opportunities, but our focus is still on golf balls and golf clubs. So I'm excited for the whole lineup. I'm excited to we're working on it, getting ready for next year, and PGA show is going to be incredible this year. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
And it's fun too. I mean, from where I sit, and the WRX people, everybody's got good stuff. Like back in the day, like you would have one equipment company or like one piece of equipment, like that sucks, that doesn't work. But like everybody kind of has their A game out. So like if you come out with a product in this market with as competitive as, like if you do something that the market identifies as like that was pretty good, you really got it together that year.
Yeah,
right?
So I mean, something that we're really proud of with Golf WRX, we had the Fitters Awards on the drivers.
You guys did pretty well.
We humble and hungry, but we swept the driver award. So under 95 miles an hour, it was Epic Flash. 95 to 105, Epic Flash. Over 105, Epic Flash. But that's not coming from necessarily even consumers. That's coming from the top fitters in the country.
That's not even us. That's the fitters.
That's coming from Club Champion, True Spec, Cool Clubs. Morton's
TXG. Shout out TXG.
Shout out to TXG. That whole crew out there in Toronto. I mean, these are the best fitters in the country and in Canada. So when they give you their highest award, that meant a lot to us for sure.
Last question I have for you, and I'll get you out of here. Big box versus because fitting now, getting fit, and the bespoke culture of golf is a big thing. So like if it was 5% of the market 5 years ago, and now it's 30% of the market, right? Do you see big box retailers carrying less clubs and going more, fitting driven? Or is it going to sort of stay the way that it is? Because I think it's better for the golfer if the fitting culture is out there.
Yeah, so the trend is towards custom fitting. There's no question about it, even with the big box stores. But you also have these high-end fitters like a Club Champion, Cool Clubs, who've done it well. But Worldwide Golf, PGA Tour, Superstore, Golf Galaxy, they're very good at fitting as well. So they're carrying less inventory, which is a little bit of a challenge for us. But we're moving more towards custom, especially in the irons. And then, in wedges, it's something we're continuing to push on the fitting. It's a category that hasn't seen as much fitting fitting because it is tougher to fit wedges inside. But they're getting better at that as well, and we're kind of trying to teach all of our fitters and partners the importance of wedge fitting. You use wedges all the time, and as you saw today, the grinds are totally different between each of the offerings that we have. So there's a huge importance to going and getting fit, or at least going and trying them on a course as well.
Right. Well, Dave, we're going to get you out of here. You
All
got
right.
something else to do. We got about 4 or 5 more questions for Roger.
I gotta market these wedges. I gotta go to a little copy, update some websites. No, this was great. Thank you to all
for having us.
the Golf WRX members. I mentioned a challenge in the Instagram story, and so I'll throw that out there today. You asked me whether I'm actually out on Golf WRX, which I am. I call myself a lurker because I don't get in there and mix it up as much as I would like to, but I do read the forums and see what people are talking about. So
you're more of a stalker than a lurker.
I'm a stalker.
Let's be honest.
So, but if someone wants to shout out, if they know what my forum name is, Golf WRX, Roger's going to hook them up with something very cool. So
Sounds good.
Very
yeah, it's a
cool.
little challenge. Thank you guys.
Thank you, Dave.
Thanks, Roger. Thanks,
Thanks,
Johnny.
David.
Okay, Roger.
Uh-oh.
We're going to do a little,
Deep
like
dark.
Phil calls
Dark.
it, fireside chat. We're just going to do, we have about 5 sort of kind of nerdy questions here from the forums, and then we'll wrap this up. So Benjamin Hargraves through our YouTube feed says, can you explain this? So Dave sort of went into the wedge shafts. He talks about the S200 versus Tour Issue S400 and X100 and the wedges. Let's talk about the misconceptions about the wedge shafts. You deal with the tour players all the time, right? The wedge shaft is one that's typically overlooked. Taking away what we talked about with Dave here,
Well,
how important is the wedge shaft, and what does it need to do? It's not a full shot wedge anymore. It's a So what do you think about it?
Well, I think for the tour is a little bit different than the amateur world, and because most of the tour players are pretty strong out there, and so because of that, they need some weight. They need to have some resistance, especially when they're hitting slower, shorter shots. They need to have some weight and feel the club in their hands. So, and Dave alluded to the S400s, 125 to 130, and the actual X100's a little bit lighter than the S4, but it's still up there. And so, depending upon the feel that they want, it's certainly, and the other shafts out there, the KBS, and they're all in that area. The deep on shaft, they're all in that area.
120 to 130.
Well, 125 to 30. They're rarely under 125 for the tour. But what the amateur, and that's why we came out with a graphite shaft. And if you have your set of irons that are graphite and they're 80 or grams, and you go to 125, I mean that's a huge difference in that. And so I like to have that lighter offering for them.
And that's the catalyst shaft that you're talking about. How much does that weigh? 80 grams?
Yes.
Okay. So that was actually literally one of the questions from Jay Poma in our YouTube feed. Asked how much does the catalyst weigh? Well, it's 80 grams. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about actually the last thing about shafts is, are you a big advocate of a softer shaft in your wedges as opposed to what's in your irons?
Certainly the most lofted wedge.
Okay.
Not necessarily a wedge you would hit full. I'd like to match that with your set.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the most lofted, the 58, and sometimes 56 is the most lofted.
If you're Seve Ballesteros, then it's 56.
Yeah, exactly.
So now I want to talk to you about, this is the Roger Cleveland story. So we've talked about MD5 and Jaws for quite a while now, but, you're a legend. You've been doing this for a while. You've worked with the best players in the world. In our Instagram post, we talked about the 3 best wedge players that you ever saw: Phil, Tiger, Seve, through Lee. What makes them great wedge players? Like, if you're just walking up to a player like that, like, is it noticeably different? Their technique, just their confidence. Like, what is it about? Like, say, we'll use Seve as an example. What made him so great, in your opinion?
Well, he would read the shot properly, and he would have a very shallow entry to the ball, so he would have wonderful contact at all times. Mm-hmm. Sergio as well. Sergio uses a C grind like yourself, because he likes to open the face and do different things, but It has ample bounce where he puts it on the ground and uses it, but he's not steep. He's shallow, and that's what you need to be.
He just won the KLM, but he used the MD4s. He didn't use the MD5. He's not in the new wedges yet.
I'm not sure. I know he has seen them.
Okay.
I'm not sure he's. They have introduced those a little earlier on the European tour, so I'm not sure if he's put that in play yet.
We'll have to figure that out. We'll get the intel on that one. MD4. Okay.
MD4.
We got our guy off camera here. Said MD4. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about Sergio. So I feel like he's a genius. You know, I've seen him up close. I've had the good fortune of filming a commercial with him a couple years ago for the film company I work with. Did some Adidas stuff, and he's just like a pure feel kind of a freak. And you know, your first experience, because he was a Titleist guy for a long time, and then he was TaylorMade, and then he landed at Callaway. So you finally get hands on this kid 2.5 years ago, to be able to work with somebody like that. What was that like for you? Because he's sort of like, he kind of fits into the Phil category as far as imagination's concerned. Like he's
Totally.
a weirdo when it comes to that stuff.
Well,
so talk to me about him.
I first saw him at 17 when he first came over here,
Okay.
and he came to Callaway. His management company was kind of showing him around, and he had a short game then that was beyond reproach, amazing. But he wanted to fly the ball to the hole, and I out of bunkers. So he had a little bit different technique, but of acceleration. But his technique around the greens is amazing.
Yeah, he's him and Phil are like of everybody that I've ever watched, they read lies. Like Fred Couple said this about Phil Mickelson, about his genius. I'm like, where does his genius really lie? Like, we all hit it far, we all flush it. He's like, Phil Mickelson can read a lie better than anybody in the world.
It's reading the shot, the
Yeah.
technique for the shot. And that's what's really fun about, to me, the short game, because every shot is different. And you got to read it and experience, and that's why when you're working and practicing, and that's where I think the folks can really improve themselves so much if they can, improve their short game, take some lessons rather than go out and just work with the long game. Take some lessons because it's a different technique. Ideally,
Right.
It's a different technique, and they can really get a lot more enjoyment out of the game.
What was the first? I want to go back because you've been with Callaway for what, since like 2000?
No, 96.
96.
Yeah.
Okay, so
This is going on 24.
the wedge, I think the first Callaway wedges that I played were the X Forged, which
Okay.
were before the groove rule changed.
Right.
And those things had some really gnarly grooves on them. But I grew up playing, like, you were famous for another wedge. I'm not going to say the company, but the
It's all right.
588 wedge,
Yep.
which is an iconic shape. It's been ripped, like kind of like the Ping Answer. It's been like people use the shape, and how much does that? Where do we see that shape, and is that still an influence in the wedge line? Because that's an iconic wedge, and it's been people use that shape quite a bit. Do you still reference back to that one as something to use for inspiration?
I do.
Okay,
I do.
sure. I mean, I would.
No, I do. First of all, from a number of different angles. The bounce, okay, it had around 14 or 15 degrees of bounce. It was a 56. We had a 60 as well, but the one that was used out on tour mostly was a 56. And it had ample bounce. The sole, I took the sole out of, designing that, I took the best of several different manufacturers.
Right.
I never wanted to copy anything, but I wanted to take the best of this, and what I'd learned previously, I put into that from working with the tour. So,
Yeah,
but the shape and the top line and the transition in the par area and how the radius, you need to have radius. In other words, curvature on the leading edge from heel to toe. And a lot of people don't necessarily like that, but what that enables you to do is, as you open the wedge to try and create a shot, that leading edge stays low, and you need to get that under the ball.
It was the first wedge, like Corey Pavin had one for a long time. He had the 60, the 588, which is actually the really low bounce one. It looked like it had a big flange
wide.
on it.
Yep.
But he used that one to win the U.S. Open, and
Yep.
that was the first time that I ever looked at a wedge and started to really grasp the fact that there was so much math that went into a wedge. Because if you look at it, you're like, just for a layman, you're looking at it like that must have a lot of bounce on it. It had like 0 degrees bounce on it. It had nothing on it, if I remember correctly.
It was wide, and it had some, early from the leading edge to maybe 3/8 of an inch back from the sole, it had some bounce.
But you had to lay it open.
Yeah, but I worked the heel off of his, and I'm honored to make his wedges, and I still do that for him. And I just sent him some wedges that look like that. But we worked the heel off so he could open up that wider flange.
Who another player that you worked with that has a totally different philosophy than most players is Rocco Mediate. He was on Callaway staff for a long time, and he is a big advocate of the 56-degree wedge. And I've seen that guy do something with a 56-degree wedge. Him and Sevi Ballesteros are the only guys I've actually watched, not Sevi live, but I've seen him in videos.
Yep.
Those guys can make a 56-degree wedge do whatever they want. So what was it like working with Rocco, and what do you learn from a guy like that?
Well, you learn width. You look at Rocco's swing, and it's all about the width of his swing on the downswing.
Right.
And when you have width, you can release the club early, and he can do that. Phil Rogers was that way. Mm-hmm. His technique
pops,
and it was tremendous. Mm-hmm. But he doesn't necessarily need to open it. He released it really early.
Yeah,
with
he gets
that width.
this part
Exactly.
He understands how to throw the club head down to get it to.
That's probably Ballard influence and his teacher but he was wide. He one of the drills I was we're messing with putting your right foot back. That's the way he swings.
Yeah.
And that's so he had a lot of time to release the club and create a lot of loft, and that's ideal for everybody.
Well, and he just watching him hit little shots around the greens, like he really understands bounce too. Like like we talked about that when we first saw each other today. Is most people look at a wedge and only see the leading edge. Yeah. He understood that the leading edge didn't matter. It was the back of all he cared about was what he couldn't see.
That's right.
Which I thought was really interesting.
Leading edge is not your friend. It's this there.
And Phil will tell you that.
Oh, absolutely.
Phil's like, that's not the part of the wedge that you're using. It's the other part of it.
And Phil wants a tight radius, so he knows the benefits of that when you're opening it up to keep it low.
Yeah. A couple more questions, and we get a lot of this in the forums, about your experience working with all these players. But like, is there one guy out there that you haven't worked with that you would die to work with, a player?
Probably McIlroy.
Okay.
I admire his technique a great deal. There's Jason Day, some of the guys from other camps, that I admire, and that I'd love to do that someday.
Yeah, Rory's
I know him to say hi, but I
Sure.
don't know him well enough to go and say, hey, let's
start to hear some wedges.
Yeah.
And as far as like some of these kids coming up, so they just signed Akshay Bhatia.
Yeah, I can't wait. I can't wait.
He's interesting.
Yes.
He's for multiple reasons. obviously optically he's like, big, tall, lanky kid, left-handed.
Yep.
So everything about him sort of is against the grain, but he's got from what I've heard, he's got a pretty pure understanding of how golf clubs work. And
I bet.
What are your preconceived notions about him coming in? Like, what are you assuming, and what do you not know?
Well, I know he's worked with Gankis and George, and I know I've met him, and my son has actually taken some lessons from George and the gentleman from Vegas. That's one of his guys, and so I'm looking forward to that. Okay. I don't know what George's philosophy of short game, but I bet you this guy has a solid short game. He can't shoot the numbers that he does without that.
No, and Callaway's done a pretty good job over the last 2 or 3 years of getting some of these kids. Like, I think it's we just met Norman out in the range today.
Right. Yep.
Obviously their USC Pac-10 influence. You get a lot of Pac-10 guys on staff. In your expertise, you've been here for a while. Like, what's the biggest difference between the kids now and the Jay Haas's, Freddie Couples, Luke, all those guys back in the day?
Well, they have such experience in tournaments and pressure, and they're not afraid to try hit it hard. You got to have some length to start with,
Right.
And they start with that and work backwards from there. And they're like sponges. They really listen well, and they really work hard. They really work hard.
Do you think it's harder though? Like we were talking about this morning, TrackMan and all the data. Some kids don't know how to play without it. Like, some kids don't know how to analyze their game without going, what's the launch? Well, that's with all the clubs from top to bottom. I feel like that's information I wouldn't even know how to use if I wanted to. So like, I guess the question is the artistry going away? Is it more of a video game now than it ever was, or is it?
Well, I think you still have to combine them both. I don't think you can just go by the numbers. You have to have feel out there, and I think data sets you free. Okay, you can learn some things, but I think the teachers have to be guarded in how much data they push on the students.
Right.
I think it's good for technical reasons to understand what's happening sometimes, but it's not the answer for everything.
It's changed. Like the game's changed so much. Like I started playing in '94, with Balada. Not that it was that long ago, but we've jumped. The game's changed 5 times since I started playing.
Yeah, the ball is pretty huge.
Ball's pretty huge.
Yeah. So are our drivers.
Well, that's we're gonna wrap this up. This has been a
fun.
cool experiment, doing the YouTube live thing. I want to thank you for your time. I got to spend all day with you. It's been an honor of mine. I mean, I've been wanting to do this for a long time, so obviously you made my dreams come true.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, to wrap this up, I want to thank Callaway Golf for having us down here. We've had a hell of a day. We did some forum member fitting that you got to walk in on, surprise the hell out of that kid, and it's been a lot of fun, and it's been eye-opening for us, just learning a little bit more about wedges, and we see everything. And, I can, as cocky as I can be, I learned some stuff today. So my brain's been open, so I appreciate that.
Well,
so
we continue to learn.
We always do.
Yep.
Well, that's going to wrap it up for the YouTube live Q&A for Golf WRX and Callaway Golf. I want to thank Callaway for having us out here. Dave Neville, Jeff Newton, AJ, Chet, #Chad, everybody here at Callaway. You guys really understand the content game, and it's been fun. Like, this has been a really cool experience.
Fun
so
for us and fun for me, for sure.
We're going to wrap this up. So this is Johnny Wunder and Roger Cleveland signing out. You guys have a great day, and we'll see you out there.